The biggest brain that has ever existed on Earth is not inside a human skull. It sits inside a sperm whale, and it weighs about 20 pounds, 5 times more than yours. But by the formula scientists use to rank intelligence, it scores lower than a rat. Something here is very wrong. Let us just sit with how big this thing is. A sperm whale's brain weighs somewhere between about 7 and 9 kilograms. Call it around 20 pounds. Picture a heavy bowling ball made of living tissue. Now compare that to us. The human brain, the thing you are using to understand these words, weighs about 1.5 kilograms, a little over 3 pounds. The sperm whale is walking around, or rather swimming around, with 5 to 6 times that. And it is not just beating us, it beats everything. An elephant, the largest animal on land, has a brain of around 5 kilograms, which is huge, but still smaller than a sperm whale's. A killer whale, no small creature itself, comes in around 5 to 7 kilograms. Even the blue whale, the single largest animal that has ever existed on this planet, bigger than any dinosaur, has a brain that is actually a little smaller than the sperm whales, despite the blue whale being several times heavier in body. Go back through the entire history of life on Earth, through every giant that ever lived, and no animal has ever carried a bigger brain than the sperm whale swimming in the ocean right now. That is not a small record. That is the record, the biggest thinking organ evolution has ever produced, sitting inside the head of a deep diving predator most people never think about twice. And that brain sits in a strange place. A sperm whale's head is mostly not brain at all. Most of that giant boxy head is filled with the spermaceti organ, the waxy sound-making structure, while the brain itself is tucked toward the back of the skull, behind all of it. So the animal famous for its enormous head is not big-headed because of its brain. In terms of space, the brain is almost an afterthought, and it is still the biggest one nature ever built. Stranger still, a newborn sperm whale is already born with a brain larger than a full-grown adult human's. It starts life out thinking bigger than we ever finish. So the obvious thought is the one almost everyone jumps to. Biggest brain. Smartest animal. Right. The sperm whale must be a genius, some kind of underwater supermind that makes us look simple. And that is exactly where the trap is waiting. Because if bigger always meant smarter, a cow with a brain bigger than a chimpanzee's would be running circles around the chimp. It is not. Size, on its own, tells you almost nothing. And when scientists tried to correct for that, to build a fairer test, the sperm whale did not just fail it. It fell to the very bottom. Which brings us to the formula that has been calling this animal stupid for 50 years. Scientists knew that raw brain size was misleading, so long ago they came up with something they thought was better. It is called the Encephalization Quotient, or EQ, and for decades it was the go-to number for ranking animal intelligence. It was a real step forward when it arrived, and it does capture something true. It is the reason we can say with actual numbers that a dolphin outthinks a shark, or that a human outthinks a horse. For a huge range of comparisons, it works just fine. The trouble only shows up at the extremes, with the very smallest animals and the very largest. And the sperm whale is about as extreme as an animal can get. The idea sounds reasonable. A bigger body needs a bigger brain just to run it, to move all that muscle and feel all that skin. So instead of asking how big is the brain, EQ asks a smarter question. How much bigger is this brain than you would expect for an animal of this body size? If your brain is way bigger than expected, you probably have a lot of spare thinking power. If it is about what you would expect, or smaller, you probably do not. Run the numbers, and humans come out on top with an EQ of around 7. Our brains are about 7 times bigger than you would expect for a mammal our size. That is the whole story of our species in one number. Right behind us, and this surprises people, come the dolphins with an EQ, the Encephalization Quotient, somewhere between 4 and 5.5, higher than any ape. That already tells you something is going on in the ocean. To fill in the rest of the ladder, a chimpanzee lands around 2.5, a dog closer to 1.2, a cat around 1, and a rat below 1. So the picture is humans at the top near 7, dolphins close behind, and then a long slide down through the clever animals to the ordinary ones. And then you get to the sperm whale. Its EQ is about 0.58, not 5, not 1, less than 1, which means its brain is actually smaller than you would expect for an animal that size. On this scale, the sperm whale ranks below a dog, below a cat, below a common rat. By the most famous measure of animal intelligence ever invented, the creature with the biggest brain on Earth looks dumber than the rodent in your walls. This is the exact fact that starts arguments online. You will see it in the comments of every whale video. Someone says the sperm whale has the biggest brain, and someone else fires back that brain to body ratio is what matters, and the whale scores terribly. So it is not that smart. And technically, by that formula, they are right. But here is what almost nobody says next. The formula is broken, and you can prove it with one tiny animal. Meet the shrew. It is a mouse-sized insect eater, and it has one of the highest brain-to-body ratios of any mammal alive. By the logic of EQ, the shrew should be a little genius, up near the top with us and the dolphins. It is not. It is a frantic little creature that mostly eats bugs and tries not to die. Its enormous brain for its body is not there because it is brilliant. It is there because the shrew's body is just very, very small, and there is a minimum amount of brain any animal needs to run the basics, no matter how tiny it gets. You can see the same problem with a hummingbird or a tiny fish. Shrink the body far enough, and the brain looks huge by comparison, no matter how simple the creature actually is. And that is the flaw. EQ can be fooled in both directions. Shrink the body, and the ratio shoots up and makes a simple animal look smart. Grow the body enormous, like a sperm whale's 50-ton frame, and the ratio collapses and makes a complex animal look stupid, even if the brain itself is a masterpiece. The sperm whale is being punished by the math simply for being big. So the 0.58 does not mean the whale is dumb. It means the ruler is bent. And to find out what is really going on, you have to stop weighing the brain from the outside and actually go inside it. That is where this stops being strange and starts being almost unbelievable. Open up a sperm whale's brain, and the first surprise is the outer layer, the cortex, the wrinkled surface where a lot of the heavy thinking happens in mammals. In the sperm whale, that layer is thin, only about 1.5 to 2 millimeters, noticeably thinner than ours. If you stop there, you might again think, see, not much to it. But then you look at how it is arranged, and the picture flips completely. The sperm whale's cortex is folded and wrinkled to an extreme degree, far more convoluted than a human brain. All that folding is a trick for cramming an enormous sheet of brain tissue into a limited space, the same way you can fit a huge bed sheet into a small drawer by scrunching it up. Unfolded and laid flat, the surface area of that cortex is vast. So the whale is not short on cortical real estate at all, it just packs it differently. Now for the part that truly shook researchers. Deep in the human brain and in the brains of great apes and elephants, there are special cells called spindle neurons, also known as von Economo neurons. They are long and fast, and they are strongly linked to some of the most human things we have. Empathy, intuition, social awareness, snap emotional judgments. For a long time, people believed these cells were a rare mark of the most advanced, emotional, self-aware minds on the planet, basically a club with humans, apes, and elephants in it. Sperm whales have them too. So do other whales and dolphins. And they did not inherit them from us, because our last common ancestor was a small mammal over 50 million years ago that did not have them. Which means these cells, the ones tied to empathy and self-awareness, evolved a second time, completely separately in the ocean. And in some whale brains, researchers have found these neurons in numbers that rival or even exceed what is in a human brain. The cells we thought made us special showed up independently in an animal we were calling dumb. There is more hiding in the details. Along with all those neurons, whale brains hold an enormous number of support cells called GLIA, well over 100 billion of them, in a pilot whale, at a ratio to neurons far higher than ours. Some scientists think that dense support network may be part of how these brains stay powered and protected through deep dives and long lives. And here is a gap in the other direction. The sperm whale brain has almost no olfactory bulb, the part that handles smell. This animal has essentially no sense of smell at all. It gave up an entire sense that most mammals lean on and rebuilt its whole world around sound instead. Nothing about the design is normal. It is a brain shaped for a life we can barely picture. It gets stranger. Human brains are divided into regions, and one thing we can say is that we do not have a certain extra lobe that cetacean brains do. Sperm whales and their relatives have an entire additional brain region called the paralimbic lobe that humans simply do not possess. We are not fully sure what it does, but its position suggests it may be tied to processing emotion and sensation together, possibly weaving feeling and social information in a way our brains do not. Read that again. This animal has a whole piece of brain that we do not have, and we do not even know what it is for. Some scientists have taken that extra lobe, together with the spindle cells and the sheer size of the emotional and social regions, and made a bold argument. That sperm whales may have inner lives every bit as rich as ours, just pointed in a completely different direction. Not richer, not poorer. Different, built around feeling and sound and belonging instead of language and tools. We cannot prove it, but we can no longer laugh it off, and that alone is a huge shift from calling this animal stupid over one broken number. And then there are the raw neuron counts. For a long time, we assumed humans must have the most neurons in the neocortex, the thinking layer, because we are so clever. Then researchers counted the neocortical neurons in a long-finned pilot whale, a close cousin of the sperm whale. A human neocortex has around 16 billion neurons. The pilot whale had about 37 billion, more than double. The most neocortical neurons ever counted in any mammal, more than any human, sitting inside the head of a whale. And remember, this brain does something ours cannot even attempt. It sleeps one half at a time, shutting down one hemisphere while the other stays awake to keep the animal breathing. And then it switches. Two halves of the biggest brain on Earth, taking turns being conscious. Try to picture being awake on only one side of your own mind, and you start to feel how far outside our experience this animal actually lives. Now, before anyone says that settles it and whales are smarter than us, hold on, because neuron counts have their own trap, and an elephant proves it perfectly. An elephant brain contains an astonishing 257 billion neurons, roughly 3 times the total in a human brain, which has around 86 billion. Case closed, elephants are 3 times smarter than us, right? No. Because when scientists looked at where those neurons actually were, they found that around 98% of them were packed into the cerebellum, a region mostly handling movement and body control, probably busy managing that giant sensitive muscular trunk with its tens of thousands of muscles. In the cortex, the part tied to complex thought, the elephant had only a few billion neurons, far fewer than a human. So the headline number, 257 billion, was hiding the real story. It is not just how many neurons you have, it is where they are and what they are wired to do. And that is the key that finally unlocks the sperm whale. To understand its brain, you cannot just weigh it or count it. You have to ask what it is running. What does a sperm whale actually do with all of that? The answer is 2 things we barely have words for. The first is sound. A sperm whale lives in darkness, a mile down, where eyes are useless, and it hunts by firing the loudest biological sound on the planet, clicks that can reach 230 decibels, and then reading the echoes that bounce back. It builds a detailed 3-dimensional picture of its world entirely out of sound, in real time, in total blackness. That takes staggering processing power. A huge portion of that giant brain is essentially a supercomputer for sound, painting the dark. You have nothing like it, which is part of why our tests fail. We are testing a sound-based mind with tools built for a vision-based one. To feel the scale of that job, understand that the whale is not simply hearing an echo. It is measuring the tiny time gaps between echoes, the texture of them, the shape of whatever they bounced off, and it is doing all of it fast enough to chase a darting squid it has never once seen with its eyes. Some researchers believe the whale may even be able to hit prey with focused bursts of sound. Whatever the full truth, the machinery to run that kind of hunting is immense, and it lives inside that brain. The second thing is each other. Sperm whales live in tight family groups that stay together for life, and their social world is rich beyond anything a simple animal could manage. They talk in patterns of clicks called codas. Different clans across the ocean speak in different dialects, like different accents or languages. There is evidence that individual whales have a signature click that works almost like a name. Mothers and aunts and grandmothers coordinate the care of calves, taking turns diving and babysitting. They appear to grieve their dead. And in a chilling demonstration of that big brain at work, during the whaling era, sperm whales learned how they were being hunted and passed that knowledge across the population, changing their behavior to escape the harpoons and teaching each other to survive us. In just a few years, the whalers' success rate collapsed by around 60% because the whales were learning faster than the men hunting them could adapt. There are other signs of a real mind at work up there. These animals do things that are hard to write off as pure instinct. In one remarkable case, a group of sperm whales adopted an injured, deformed dolphin that had likely been pushed out by its own kind, letting it travel and socialize with them for no clear reason at all. That is not the behavior of a simple brain. That is curiosity, tolerance, maybe even something like kindness, in an animal our favorite formula ranked below a rat. And here is the detail that stops people cold. A sperm whale mother does not just give birth and swim on. She, along with the aunts and grandmothers around her, will care for and teach a single calf for around 15 years. 15 years. Sit with that number and ask yourself why. Why would any animal need a decade and a half of childhood just to learn how to catch squid? It would not. That long, patient upbringing is not really about hunting at all. It is about learning how to be part of a family, how to speak the dialect of your clan, how to belong. That is a childhood measured on the same scale as a human one. And the spindle cells packed into that brain, the empathy cells, appear to let these animals feel a great deal of what you feel. Grief when one of them dies. Sadness. A bond with their young that lasts a lifetime. The scientists who spend their careers with these animals keep arriving at the same uncomfortable sentence. We are not so different. That is what the brain is for. Not building tools, not solving the puzzles we hand to lab rats. It is for navigating a world of sound and a lifelong web of relationships, memory, and culture. And these are long memories and long lives. A sperm whale can live 70 years or more, and it spends those decades inside the same family, building up knowledge, dialect, and experience the whole way. A brain like that is not just for a single moment of hunting. It is a library, filled over a lifetime, shared across a family, and passed down through generations. That is exactly the kind of job that grows a brain bigger and bigger over millions of years. Judged by a test of human-style cleverness, it looks like a failure. Judged by what it evolved to do, it is a masterpiece, running software so alien to us that we do not even have the right exam. And the sperm whale is not the only animal that exposes how bad our exams are. Not even close. Once you accept that brain size, ratio, and neuron count each tell only part of the story, the whole animal kingdom starts to look strange. Let me show you a few brains that break every rule we have because they make the sperm whale make a lot more sense. Start with the dolphin, the sperm whale's smaller cousin. On the Encephalization Quotient scale, dolphins rank second only to humans, above every ape. They pass the mirror test, meaning they recognize themselves in a reflection, a sign of self-awareness that most animals fail completely. They use tools, they call each other by signature whistles, and they solve problems that stump most mammals. Same broad family as the sperm whale, tiny fraction of the body size and one of the highest minds we have ever measured. The ocean is clearly doing something with brains that we underestimated for a very long time. Then look at the elephant again, but this time at its behavior instead of its neuron count. Elephants mourn their dead, returning to bones and touching them gently with their trunks. They recognize themselves in mirrors. They remember individuals and places for decades. A brain we thought was mostly about controlling a trunk turns out to hold deep memory and something that looks a lot like grief. Now go the opposite direction, to the crow. A crow's brain is tiny, smaller than a walnut, nothing next to a whale or an elephant. And yet crows and their relatives make and use tools, solve multi-step puzzles, plan for the future, recognize individual human faces, and even seem to hold grudges. How with such a small brain? Because bird brains pack their neurons incredibly densely, cramming an enormous number of them into a small space, wired for efficiency. Size did not matter, wiring did. Parrots pull off the same trick, with dense little brains that let them use logic and even grasp simple ideas about numbers. Pigs solve mazes and learn tasks that look like little video games. And a honeybee, with a brain smaller than a grain of rice and about 1 million neurons, can count, recognize human faces, and learn a skill just by watching another bee do it first. None of these animals have big brains. Every one of them shreds the idea that big is the same as smart. And then there is the octopus, which throws the entire mammal rulebook out the window. An octopus has around 500 million neurons, but here is the twist. Roughly 2/3 of them are not in its head at all. They are in its arms. Each arm can taste, feel, and react on its own, almost like it has a mind of its own. The octopus does not have one central brain running everything like we do. It has a brain that is spread out through its whole body, a completely different design for intelligence that evolved on a branch of life that split from ours over 500 million years ago. And octopuses are smart, opening jars, escaping tanks, solving mazes. An octopus can change the color and texture of its whole body in a heartbeat, react to a threat with each arm at once, and problem solve in ways that seem impossible for a cousin of the snail. It is intelligence built on a blueprint so different from ours that meeting it is about as close as we can get here on Earth to meeting an alien mind. Finally, remember the shrew from earlier, the little animal with a brain-to-body ratio near the top of the charts, and the intelligence of, well, a shrew. Put all of these next to each other. The dolphin, brilliant with a modest brain. The elephant, emotional with a movement-heavy brain. The crow, a genius with a brain the size of a nut. The octopus, thinking with its arms. The shrew, big ratio and nothing to show for it. And the blue whale, the biggest animal that ever lived, carrying a brain that is small for its colossal body. Every single one breaks a rule. There is no clean line from brain size to intelligence, none from ratio, none from neuron count. And standing at the far extreme of all of it, the biggest brain ever built, low on the ratio chart, packed with cells we thought were ours, running on sound and memory, is the sperm whale, the ultimate proof that we never really understood what a big brain is for. So, if you tried to write a simple list of the smartest animals, it would be a mess. Humans, sure. Then dolphins, apes, elephants, crows, parrots, octopuses, pigs, all crowding in with wildly different brains, some huge, some tiny, some spread out through their arms. Brain size would not predict the order. Ratio would not. Neuron count would not. The one thing all of them share is not a number at all. It is that each one evolved a mind shaped exactly for the life it leads. And no animal makes that point harder to ignore than the one carrying the biggest brain of them all. Which leaves one question we have been circling the whole time. If the sperm whale is not using that brain to be a genius the way we measure genius, then why on earth did evolution build the biggest brain in history in the first place? Here is the honest answer We are not completely sure. And that might be the most fitting ending this story could have. There are strong ideas. One is that the brain is the price of hunting in the dark, building a full picture of the world out of sound, tracking fast squid a mile down in total blackness, may simply demand an enormous amount of processing power, and the brain grew to pay for it. Another idea is social, living your whole life in a tight family, tracking who is who, remembering relationships across decades, learning the dialect of your clan, teaching your young. All of that is a mental workload, and big social brains tend to show up in animals with rich social lives. Some researchers point to culture itself, the passing of knowledge and behavior from one generation to the next, as the thing that pushed the brain bigger and bigger over time. And some think sheer size may have played a role in surviving the cold and the crushing pressure of the deep. There's even a stranger possibility. A few scientists have wondered whether part of that giant brain helps the animal manage the extreme demands of diving itself, keeping its systems balanced under pressures that would kill almost anything else. In other words, some of the biggest brain in history may be busy with problems we would not even think of as thinking. Most likely, it is a mix of all of these, and the full truth is still out there, waiting. But step back and look at what we have found. The biggest brain that has ever existed. A brain our favorite formula calls dumber than a rat using a formula we know is broken. A brain thinner on the surface but folded into a vast sheet of tissue. A brain carrying cells tied to empathy and self-awareness that evolved a second time, in the sea, without us. A brain with an entire lobe we do not have and cannot fully explain. A brain running on sound and on lifelong bonds, doing things we have no test for. Nothing about it is normal. But maybe that word, normal, was always the problem. We called this brain strange because it did not match ours, because it failed exams we designed for ourselves, because it did not build cities or tools or the things we count as intelligence. We spent all this time asking whether the sperm whale is as smart as a human and never noticed we were holding up a mirror and complaining that the reflection was the wrong shape. The sperm whale did not build a brain to be a better version of us. It built a brain to be the best possible version of a sperm whale, to think in sound and family and depth, in a world we can barely visit and will never truly understand. The abnormal thing was never the whale's brain. It was our belief that ours is the only kind that counts. And somewhere out there right now, a mile down in the dark, the largest brain on Earth is switching between the two halves of itself, listening to the clicks of its family echo through the black, doing something we do not have a word for and does not need one.